Are you not feeling well, my queen? It seems like you're not happy today.
Is there anything bothering you, my majesty?
I'm just worried about our literary works which have lost their vibrancy and that many people are no longer interested in our own literature. I'm just curious about what other literature is like. My whole life revolves around reading about our own literary pieces. I just want to know about other literature and get some ideas for producing a beautiful one.
I heard an interesting literary period of written English and American, my queen, which is the neoclassical period.
Oh, it sounds interesting.
How about we're going to search it for you, my queen?
That would be great.
Good morning, everyone. The Queen is calling for those people who wants to join in knowing literature from the period of Neoclassical. For those willing, the Queen is welcoming you to the palace tomorrow morning.
I am calling here to help me in knowing the literature of the period of Neoclassical. Now, my people, go and bring those information to me. Finally, they arrived.
We're back, my queen.
What information did you bring?
As we go to the neoclassical period, my queen, we found out that neoclassical literature was written between 1660 and 1798. This time period is broken into three parts: the Restoration period, the Augustan period, and the Age of Johnson. Writers of the neoclassical period tried to imitate the style of the Romans and Greeks. Thus, the combination of the terms neo, which meant new, and classical, as in the day of the Roman and Greek classics. This was also the era of the Enlightenment, which emphasized logic and reason. It was preceded by the Renaissance and followed by the Romantic era. In fact, the neoclassical period ended in 1798, when Wordsworth published the Romantic lyrical ballad. Neoclassical literature is characterized by order, accuracy, and structure. In direct opposition to Renaissance attitude, where man was seen as basically good, the neoclassical writers portrayed man as inherently flawed. They emphasized restraint, self-control, and common sense. This was the time when conservatism flourished in both politics and literature. Some popular types of literature included parody, essay, satires, letters, fables, melodrama, rhyming with couplets. Neoclassical literature has been written in a period where social order undergoing a tremendous change. In the so-called Enlightenment period, people believed that natural passions aren't necessarily good. Natural passions must be subordinated to social needs and be strictly controlled. Authors believed that reason was the primary basis of authority. They believed that social needs are more important than individual needs. It is quite and contrary to the preceding age, in which emphasis was laid on individualism rather than socialism. This lesson listed some of the most famous neoclassical writers, who included John Dryden, Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, Daniel Defoe, and Samuel Johnson.
Greetings, my queen. As we traveled in our journey, we found out that the Restoration period in 1660 to 1700, or the Age of Dryden. He was the representative writer of this period. The restoration of King Charles II in 1660 marks the beginning of a new era both in life and the literature of England. The king was received with a wild joy in his return from exile, and changed the government from commonwealth to kingship corresponded to a change in the mood of a nation. The greater part of restoration period there was awareness of limitation of human experience without faith in extension of the resources. There was a disposition to accept such limitation, to exploit the potentialities of strictly human world. The restoration of Charles II brought about revolutionary change in life and literature. During this gravity, moral, and decorum in all things which distinguished the Puritan period were thrown to winds. The Restoration literature is realistic. It produced abundance of prose and poetry and a distinctive comedy of manners known as Restoration comedy. There are a lot of things happened there, my queen. Did you know, my queen? We found out that the poetry of Restoration period is formal, intellectual, and realistic. Their form is more important than a subject matter. John Dryden was the first of the new, as Milton was the last of the former school of poetry. He was a versatile poet. The Restoration marks the beginning of modern prose. Prose is dominated by Christian religious writing, but Restoration also saw the beginning of two genera that would dominate later period: fiction and journalism. Religious writing often strayed into political and economic writing, implied or directly addressed religion. John Dryden was one of the greatest prose writers of this period. His prefaces and his famous essay on dramatic poetry make him the leader of that modern prose in which the style is essay, unaffected, molded to the subject, and in which proper words are placed in their proper places. The theatre, which were closed in 1642, were opened during the Restoration. They became the riotous hands of the upper classes. Consequently, the plays written for the playhouses were distinctly calculated by the author to appeal to a courtly and cavalier audience. It is that explains the rise of the heroic tragedy and the development of comedy of manners. The Restoration comedy is also known as comedy of manners. These comedies express a reaction against Puritanism and sexual repression it had attempted to enforce. Fashionable intrigues, sex, marriage, and adultery were treated with cynicism, with worldly wit and sense of the comedy of life. The characters in the play no doubt owe much to the courtiers, the wits, and the men about town as well as the ladies of fashion, citizen, wives, and country girls. That was all I know in our journey, my queen.
Your Highness, these are the informations that I have about the Augustan Age, Majesty. The Augustan Age was a period during the first half of the 18th century in England. Poets during this period created verse inspired by the authors like Virgil and Ovid. The Augustan Age was also marked by the evolution of satirical verse, the development of the novel, and the use of melodrama over political satire. The Augustan Age was also noted for changes in philosophical thought, for example, the formalization of capitalism. The writing during this period was highly regulated and stylized, but the borders of the movement are unclear, meaning scholars are undecided on when exactly it begins and ends. But the literature produced during the reign of Queen Anne, King George I, and George II is considered part of the literary period. The Augustan Age was an important period during the 18th century literature. During this period, authors like Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift created their groundbreaking satire. Their deaths in the 1740s are often used as a marker for the end of the Augustan Age. The majority of the writing produced during this period was structured and stylized, but it also foreshadowed the changes that were to come with the Romantic era. The period was an important transition away from courtly writing and towards a style of verse that is more modern. Next is we have the history of the Augustan Age. The period is also sometimes known as the Age of Reason and the Age of Neoclassicism. It was marked by a new availability of books as prices fell and the trade of chapbooks and broadsheets. Periodicals were also a new development. They included the Gentleman's Magazine and the London Magazine. Newspapers bloomed and spread throughout the country. Most of the authors during this period wrote distinctly political texts. Even those who wrote plays and poems were in some way politically active or funded by political sources. Authors also spent time writing essays, criticizing other literary works, making understanding the ins and outs of some literary works difficult. That would be all, Your Highness.
So Alexander Pope and the Augustan Age. Alexander Pope is regarded as the single most important poet of the period. In fact, scholars often describe his writing as dominating the Augustan Age. He has numerous enemies in the politics and social sphere. People he referred to as the dunces. He fought with his contemporaries over his poetry and the proper use of a poetic voice. Two of his greatest works during this period were The Rape of the Lock, a satire and mock heroic, and The Dunciad. So examples of Augustan Age literature is The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. The Rape of the Lock is the best-known work of the Augustan Age. It is also Alexander Pope's most famous publication. It is a mock heroic and a wonderful example of high burlesque literature. It was first published in 1712 and then later in 1714 in a new 5-canto version. This version has accompanied by 6 new engravings. The final version of the work appeared in 1717. The Rape of the Lock details a small incident, satirizing it and comparing it to the epic, dramatic, and over-the-top world of gods. It was based on real events and got to the heart of aristocratic society. It begins when the speaker, Pope, declares that there was a dire offense. A man has assaulted a woman, and she has rejected him. Here are a few lines from these important literary accomplishments. What dire offense from amorous ghost springs? What might contest rising from trivial things? I sing this verse to Caril, Muse is due. This even Belinda my vouchsafe to view. Slight is the subject, but not so the praise, if she inspires and he approves my lays. So another example of the Augustan Age literature by Alexander Pope is the Dunciad. The Dunciad is considered to be one of Pope's 2 great masterpieces. The poem celebrates a goddess and dullness and her agents who brings distractions and decay to Britain. Pope published the first version in 1728 anonymously. It was followed by 2 others. Today, it is well understood that part of his inspiration for the characters in the book comes from his poor relationship with the royal court. The literary work addressed and insulted several important literary figures of the time, including Louis Theobald. He presented the premise that literature and the arts more broadly had been handed over to the dunces, who were now controlling and commodifying writing. So here is a quote from the text. Nor public flame, nor private dares to shine, nor human spark is left, nor gleams divine. Lo, thy dread empire chaos is restored. Light dies before thy uncreating word. Thy hand, great anarch, lets the curtain fall, and universal darkness buries all. So,
Age of Sensibility, sometimes described as the Age of Johnson. Dr. Johnson was an English author who made lasting contributions to English literature as a poet, essayist, moralist, literary critic, biographer, editor, and lexicographer. Johnson has been described as arguably the most distinguished man of letters in English history. He is also the subject of the most famous single work of biographical art in the whole of literature. The age of Johnson, often referred to as the age of sensibility. It is the period in English literature that ranged from the middle of the 18th century until 1798. Ending this age, the Romantic period arrived in 1798 with the publication of lyrical ballads by poets William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Samuel Johnson in 1709 and 1784, poet, critic, and author of fiction, is the namesake for this period in literature. Johnson wielded considerable influence over this era with works that focused on neoclassical aesthetics, the study of natural and artistic beauty with an eye toward the great classical writers. Johnson and his fellow writers placed great emphasis on the values of the Enlightenment, which stressed the importance of using knowledge, not faith, as superstition, to enlighten others, and to lead the expansion of many social, economic, and cultural areas including astronomy, politics, and medicine. One of Johnson's most lasting legacies is his Dictionary of English Language in 1755. While this huge undertaking of Johnson's was neither the first dictionary in existence nor exceptionally unique, was the most used and admired until the appearance of the Oxford English Dictionary in 1928. One of Johnson's most fervently held beliefs was that the language of people should be in use in literature and that a writer should avoid using grammar and vocabulary that not appeal to the common reader. The age of sensibility is marked by works that focus more directly on anti-classical features of old ballads and new bardic poetry. These writers began to embrace new forms of literary expression formerly avoided by writers of the age of Johnson, such as medieval history and folk literature. Classic prose fiction examples from the age of sensibility include Lawrence Sterne's Tristram Shandy in 1759 and Henry Mackenzie's The Man of Feeling in 1771. The poetry of William Collins, William Cowper, Thomas Gray, and Christopher Smart are also attributed to the age of sensibility.
The Age of Sensibility, also known as the Age of Johnson or the Age of Enlightenment, is a literary and cultural movement that emerged in the 18th century in Britain. It is characterized by an emphasis on individual sensibility, emotional expressiveness, and a rejection of the formal and artificial convention of the previous era. The Age of Sensibility is generally considered to have begun in the mid-18th century and lasted until the end of century, overlapping with the Romantic period that followed. It is often associated with writers such as Samuel Johnson, Lawrence Sterne, and Oliver Goldsmith, emphasizes the importance of feeling and emotion in literature and reject the rigid rules of the neoclassical era. The term sensibility refers to the ability to feel and respond to emotion, and the literature of the age often focused on the inner emotional experiences of characters. The movement also saw a rise in the popularity of sentimental literature, which aimed to evoke strong emotions in the readers through depictions of virtue, suffering, and sacrifice.
What a great information, everyone! You really did well, and I will reward each of you for the job well done.